Hi, my name is Angela Polania, and I'm excited to speak with you today about preparing for your first ISO 4201 audit. I'm not sure if any of you have started this process, are going to get started, have done it. So I'd love to get your feedback if you have, and let's get with it. Just a little bit about me. My background, my name is Angela Polania. I've been working in risk advisory and cyber for over 20 years. I've worked with hundreds of companies, middle market, enterprise, B2B SaaS, and other industries to get them ready for all sorts of audits from FedRAMP all the way to HIPAA, hardest to easiest. And ISO 4201 is one of the new ones that we've been working with for about a year and a half. I have a postgraduate in advanced machine learning, generative AI, and data science from UT Austin. I've taken several courses on agentic AI and how to build agents, how to fine-tune models if you ever need to do that, Vive coding. And most recently, I've been working in a lot of ISO 4201 projects. So wanted to put a little bit together here for you to go over what this certification entails, how you get certified, and let's get with it. So ISO 4201 is an easy framework, and it's the first certifiable framework for AI. There's other things that we'll talk about in a minute, but this is the one that you could get a certification. And it came out back in 2023, started really being applied, I would say the early comers in 2024. And now we're here in the middle of 2026, and many B2B tech companies are getting this certification. What it is not, it is definitely not a deep technical framework. It's not under the hood testing very detailed things. It's more of a governance framework, the AIMS, Artificial Intelligence Management System. So it's very attainable, especially if you already have ISO 2701 and other ISOs in the books. So we're going to talk about what ISO 4201 is in a little bit more detail. What the AMS is. It's not just an AI policy. We're going to talk about what we are seeing as the 5 most notable gaps when we start working with clients. We're going to talk about the 90-day roadmap from starting to getting certified, some real world case studies with clients and situations, talking about roles and responsibilities, and what would be your next step. So what's happening now? What do I see? What do we see a big uptick with ISO 4201? I would say the main one is enterprise procurement. Clients and these B2B tech companies that are serving enterprise and middle market companies are being asked by their questions about their responsible AI practices, if they're training with their data. So this is coming up quite heavily on vendor assessments, and clients that already have ISO 2701 are getting these done. There's also one big regulation in the world named the UAI Act. Some of the timeframes have changed. We'll have another webinar to talk about the UAI Act, but this for European companies, some of our clients that we see from Europe are definitely trying to marry UAI Act with ISO 4201. And for those of you who have heard of the NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, AI RMF Risk Management Framework, this is not a certifiable framework. It is best practices and guidelines that NIST wrote. And since it's not a certifiable framework, I would say ISO 4201 takes precedence, but we're bringing up the NIST ARMF here because it could give you a listing of controls. There's also the Gen AI profile, NIST Gen AI profile, and they have like listing of controls and things that you should be looking at when you're dealing with generative AI applications or just general AI. So here, again, going back to ISO 4201, we're going to talk about what it requires. So like any ISO framework, no different. You have to have a whole bunch of documents and policies and standards documented. So we'll get into that in a little bit. You have to have a risk assessment documented. This is not different in ISO 2701, but obviously your scope is about the AI and not the security of whatever is in scope for ISO 2701. There's a new artifact that comes up for ISO 4201 called the AI Impact Assessment. It's kind of like a business impact assessment for those that have to deal with BIAs, but specific to AI and the use case, product, or scope that you have selected for the certification. You also have to perform an internal audit, no different than other ISO requirements, ISO 9001, ISO 2701, the mandated annual internal audit. One of the big things, obviously, for any audit is you have to show control implementation and evidence that those controls exist. These are, I would say, or it's very different than what you, not very, but somewhat different than what you've dealt with in ISO 2701, for instance, because the evidence that you have to obtain is from different groups and different types of artifacts, like responsible AI and testing of models, testing of retrieval-augmented generation implementations. And those are definitely different artifacts than what you've seen in the past if you don't know the types of audits. And like any other ISO program, you have to have evidence and clause 10 of mandatory requirements of continual process improvement, tone at the top, management review. So here's no different. You want to establish some sort of committee and go through the cadence of a lot of reviews and processes to show that you have an AIMS established. So let's talk about right out of the gate, the 5 gaps that we're seeing the most and how to tackle them. So, the first one is some clients we start working with. This has kind of been a theme. We start working with clients, and some are very gung ho. Okay, we're going to do our product. So they pick an AI product, and that's in scope. But the systems where these models or data, the vector databases, for instance, or the storage of the data that is being used for training of the models or for retrieval-augmented generation implementations. Those systems have not been audited before for ISO 2701 for security. So now, they're like, oh, we have to include those now in our ISO 2701 certificate. And for ISO 4201, they need to define better the business aspect of the AI use case and what it's being used for and what technologies are being used. So that's one place where we've seen that they need some work. Or the other work is that some clients start with like, hey, we want to do like an AI governance program across the organization. And then they realize, well, we're really doing this for a client to meet a client requirements, procurement, right? Pressure. So they start with thinking that they're going to do the company wide and realize that it's wiser to start with the product specific and then over time try to apply some of the practices learned from this effort for product specific into a overall governance structure because they'll leverage the committees, for instance, to do so. Where are we seeing this? Where ISO 4201 is happening right now, enterprise security products, legal tech companies, again, all B2B SaaS tech companies and the healthcare tech industry, ERP, SaaS B2B applications, financial tech, foundational models like OpenAI and Anthropic and those companies have ISO 4201, hyperscalers, AWS, they're, for instance, Bedrock services and those adjacents, the ML Studio, all of those are ISO 4201 certified. Data companies, RPA, workflow B2B SaaS companies are getting ISO 4201. So you get to see a theme here. I've also seen companies like very large enterprise companies that are not so much selling product, but build very AI implementations that their customers care about, like law firms, for instance, that they're also looking to get ISO 4201 for those internal cases where there's a lot of reliance and customers want to know more about how they use AI to come up with those conclusions and those legal briefings, for instance. So scoping, again, an area that needs work. So documentation, policies. And this is a gap across all ISO. If you've never done an ISO anything, you're going to have a lot of gaps in mandatory requirements over documentation. So here's no different. Most companies already have an acceptable use policy, AI acceptable use, but the typical documents of like the AIMS manual, which we'll talk about in a minute, what that means. Your SDLC is not really kind of getting into the weeds a little bit more with AI and what you have to do for SDLC in terms of data testing, in terms of model validations, but it gets more into like the typical SDLC of software development. So we see that those documents have incomplete information. Data governance needs to now include the AI intersection with the AI governance policies. So definitely documents is an area that it's like the most common gap, which is the good news too, because documentation is easy to fix, not like buying technology and putting things in place. And sometimes what I would say too is, engineering teams are not used to this type of audit documentation. So legal may have some documentation or security, but the guys that are dealing with this day-to-day don't have what it needs to be done. So they need a little help from security or audit or legal or third parties to put this all together. Now, evidence problem. This is definitely an area where obviously for any audit, that's always the case. I think here, what the first question clients is like, what do I need to submit? I see this kind of semi-vague controls of ISO 4201 framework. And what do I need to do? How much do I submit? And how do I submit and how to automate, obviously, that evidence collection if I can? So adequacy and sufficiency is definitely coming up as a question. And then what happens now is that you have different types of evidence not previously obtained before or reviewed by people outside of the AI engineering teams, like reviewing the bias assessment reports. If you have a tool that you have to test for bias, like let's say like some HR scoring system for resumes or something like that, or you have to do some model validation reports, the model card, human in the loop step functions, configurations inside like a workflow in Bedrock, for instance. Like these are the types of evidence that you've never obtained before. People don't even know where they need to obtain them from. So this is an area definitely, but again, easy to fix. I'd say roles and responsibilities, another gap. They're not well documented or there's no formal committees. So, what is the role of legal versus the role of data science teams and AI engineering teams? I mean, it's kind of obvious what the roles are, but documenting it and also joining committees where all these people get together to talk about AI governance, it's really a thing that has to be improved, I would say, in most clients that we work with and are mature for the purpose of getting the certification. And then I would say another thing is that they say, oh, well, my risk assessments, my impact assessment, and you have to produce two different deliverables. As mentioned prior, an impact assessment is like a BI, like business impact analysis, looking at the impact of something. And then the other one is like your vulnerabilities and potential risk and assessing how well you would, based on your control evaluation, meet, or mitigate those risks. So very similar, honestly, in terms of what you're going to look at. So you could leverage that. You could do your internal audit risk assessment and impact assessment, looking at the same set of evidence, but you want to produce 3 different documents in order to ensure you meet the standard. And then now let's get into how do you get ready? So you're here, you want to get certified and you want to DY it if possible. So first thing you want to do, and as you're familiar with, is your first 30 days, right? You want to get your scope together, documented the way ISO wants it. We have templates for that. We can share them at any time. How you document your scope is critical, and making sure that whatever it is, the scope, if it's product or if it's the company-wide, that you document according to the standard. Then you want to gap assess. You want to understand based on the scope where, both mandatory requirements, gap, as well as the Annex A, which is made up of 38 controls. You want to assess how much information you have to show evidence of that control, or if, more standard reports or reviews need to be established to show evidence of that control taking place, right? So is the control implemented? Is there evidence? Is the evidence adequate and sufficient? And as we talked about before, you want to define your roles and responsibilities, document them in your AIMS manual, sometimes not so much in the scope statement. In the IMS manual, you will document roles and responsibilities and throughout different policies as well. After that, right, you've done your scope, you've done your gap assessment. Now you got to fix things. And some of the things you're going to have to do is you're going to have to document your risk and impact assessments. You probably haven't done these in the past. So you want to get that out of the gate. You want to take care of other documentation that may be a gap, which what we're seeing here is enhancements of data governance policies, inventories for tools, systems, and resources, which we'll talk about that in a second. So documenting all of that, seeing if, depending on the use case, if the technical folks need to produce more formal reports of reviews of certain actions or like metrics, for instance, and you want to start working with all this documentation within the 30 to 60 days, and if kind of like a pre-evaluation of evidence. But then, you start moving into 61 and 90 days. We have a section towards the end of Annex A about incident response and monitoring of third parties, monitoring, having a way to know that you have AI incidents and make sure that you respond to those. So what we're seeing here is you want to enhance your existing incident response policy or cyber and include how you will handle AI incidents, define those, the key incidents or categories of incidents that you would have and how you will handle it, and enhance those documents, enhance third-party risk management that you will also add, like your vendors, like your customers are doing to you. You're going to add to your vendors responsibilities for AI, responsible AI, and so on and so forth. So you want to take care of that. And then you've done all the remediation, you fill out all the documents you needed, got all the evidence, preliminary evidence that you needed, and you feel like you're in good shape. Then you want to do your internal audit at that point. And you don't want to do it, I mean, you could do it before, but you want to do it when you know that you're not going to have that many findings or any findings. So that way, when you take it to your corrective action planning process, you have less things to report. And when it goes through the SMS, the AIMS steering committee, there's just less items to review between the risk assessment, internal audit, and the impact assessment. So here is obviously you want to get to a point, right? Your internal audit is like your pre-audit, that you should know at this point that you have no surprises for the certification and you're ready to go. So again, let's recap real quick. Foundation, 30 days, discovery, baseline, 31 to 60 days remediation. You could start some remediation prior, obviously, to the 31 to 60 days. You start getting ready, you do your pre-audit, you finish your incident reporting, your vendor management on the last 30 days, and then you're ready to have an audit performed. You should have hired the auditor before that, so that way you meet the requirements of the, you are ready, teed up by day 90 or whatever to start an audit, so you should book those auditors way before. So real quick, some real world case studies. We're going to talk about two different types of organizations and what they had to do. So one situation is a large enterprise ERP company believes that ISO 42001 will provide a competitive advantage with existing and new clients as well as prospects. It's being asked by some customers, but what they're building is a product that will do some automated capabilities for inside the ERP, like GL posting functionalities or account reconciliations, AR reconciliations, and things that are automating some of those manual functions performed by accounting personnel or people that are using the ERPs. So they want to give assurance to their customers that these ERPs are accurate, that they're not that these agents that are being ran inside their application are accurate, that they are tested before they go into production to make sure that they don't make mistakes, that there's ways to catch mistakes before anything really it's posted into production in their ERP, which that would be an accounting problem. And, as you can imagine, create audit problems and all sorts of things. And also to make sure that that they give assurance to the customer that they're not testing with client data. So ISO 42001, a good way to get started. And what we did in 90 days, complete gap assessment, impact assessment, internal audits, risk assessment, create a formal AI governance committee, develop a very good RACI, and they were ready to, within actually 60 days, ready to call, had already scheduled the auditor before the stage 1 audit, and shortly after stage 2. Obviously the wins for them, they had no non-conformities because they got ready prior. They had a lot of documentation already. There were some, tweaks and things that needed to happen to the technical documentation in terms of how it's presented for auditors, but they have done a lot of due diligence and there was a lot of QA processes and their AI built out. So there was evidence for that. There were no findings. They've closed 2 deals that they had on pipeline waiting for that to take place, and they passed this audit. So case study 2 is a healthcare company that, because of what they do for a living, have some sort of responsibilities with the UAI Act because they're dealing with clinical data and with citizens of the EU. So one of their clients actually also required that they prove that they are UAI compliant. So they decided to do 4201 map to UAI Act and run through that process, make sure that they meet the requirements of high risk category for the UAI Act and mapping it all to ISO 4201. They, because of what they do for a living, have been performing bias assessments across demographic groups, which is a lot of statistical analysis to make sure that their tools categorizing things correctly. They've had data lineage from training to products. That's something that's very important. Masking of data, making sure PII is not coming through when these models are being tested, making sure that there's sandboxes for testing. They documented human oversight where there's human oversight and mechanisms used by their clients and that they could use in their product to make sure that there's good governance of AI and the outputs and results of these tools. So what happened for them within 90 days, they had all the evidence they needed, all the addition, they had, obviously missing artifacts and things they needed to produce, put it all together, make sure that they did all the things that are required, internal audit, risk, impact assessment, documentation. And within 90 days, they were ready. And there was a mapping again to UA Act. So the additional kind of clauses of the UA Act were embedded in their existing, in their new built AIMS. And they were able to show both UA Act compliance as well as ISO 4201, get the certification, and built, honestly, a stronger AI governance program at their organization. So a little bit about RACI, right? Responsible, accountable, consulting, and informed. Who, some of the questions we answer out of the gates, who's responsible for what? So obviously the responsibility for transparent and responsible AI falls in the developers and people that are developing that. And there's got to be documentation as to what they do, what kind of metrics they follow, what kind of statistical methods they use to check whether things are working the way they intend, whether they're doing validation of outputs, and using the right metrics and models to get the right outcomes for what they're building. Legal is usually consulted and informed of any changes to product, any changes to responsibilities, with how tools need to be used with customers to make sure that the right contractual obligations are noted in terms of service. They're always consulted on any change related to that. So we have to document all these things in that ISMS manual of your roles and responsibilities. Accountability obviously lies within different teams depending on what it is. Security is very involved in the security of agents and new build-outs of AI, and what kind of monitoring practices they have in place to make sure that there is oversight and proper incident handling if something were to go wrong. So here we talked about it a little bit, but these are the usual culprits of like an AI governance committee, which is IT and security, data science teams. They may be very robust organizations like in the insurance world or something that they have risk groups involved as well. Business operations, the people that are using this AI or selling it are involved in this, legal, compliance. So typical culprits, you want to document the roles and responsibilities very well and make sure it's covered in your documentation. So what did we cover today? I do believe ISO 4201 is very accessible. If you already have ISO 2701 and 27701, 9001, and you want to go and jump the leap to meet your contractual obligations, this is a very good framework. It's not that difficult, and it's a good way to get started. I do believe over time, like anything with this, there will be more controls, there will be more things that need to be tested, but right now, not so bad. 38 additional controls and mandatory requirements. We learn about typical gaps and how to address those gaps. We learned about compliance as a competitive, well, that's a wrap-up line there. But policy, right? You want to have an AIMS, not just a document, but an entire program with continual process improvement, management review. And that is very attainable to get this audit in 90 days or less. And obviously, I do view the world that compliance is a competitive advantage. It gets more deals. These things create less friction in the sales process and do improve your security posture, your AI governance posture, because they provide more visibility and accountability and documentation of what's going on. So it does create that sense of ownership across the organization and oversight as well. So what I want to do next is let's go over like typical deliverables and how you fill this out. Then you want to start documenting here your tooling resources. right? What are you using? So some clients, for instance, maybe on Bedrock, AWS Bedrock, so you would list that you use Bedrock. What other third-party tools or systems do you use? What models are you using? If your Bedrock is using, you're connected usually with Claude or GPT or all of the above, depending on what it is. So you want to start documenting your tooling. What tools do you use, for vector databases, for monitoring, if you're also using third-party tools outside of what Bedrock brings, for instance, all of that will get documented here. You also want to document compute. So you will document here more like the models, what you use, how do you check, where let's say if you're using, let me think about this. Have a client that is building some local LLMs on edge cases because they're in the IoT industry. So you will want to document that here as well. That really doesn't apply to many companies, but you will document that as well in system and computer resources. You would also want to document kind of what data do you use for training, or data, where is it pulling from, that, you will give assurance to customers at some point in your data governance and evidence that you're not using client data to test your models. And you want to talk about, if get into a little bit of an inventory or data. You could get this from systems. If you're using like data governance systems that will help you with this, that would be great. But we got to document these things and have it for the audit. So then we had talked a little bit about missing documentation. Having an AI governance policy, an AI acceptable use policy is not enough. So you got to document your AIMS manual. And in the manual, you pretty much go through the clause by clause of mandatory requirements. Obviously, you have a separate document for scope of the AIMS. You could refer it here, and you will have a complete reference to the scope statement. But you want to document here roles and responsibilities, that you have a governance policy that you'll refer to. You would want to talk about how you handle risk management at a high level. Again, this is your high level document, how you do risk treatment of AI. That you follow an AI impact assessment process. You will obviously document the details of an impact assessment elsewhere, but this is like your governance document that dictates that these are the required components of your AMS. Another big thing is you want to document your objectives of your program. My objectives are to make sure that I have secure agents working in my orchestrator and only doing the function that they're assigned to do. So you would document how, that's your objective. And then what is it that the things that you will do to make sure that you meet your objective, what monitoring and metrics you have in place to ensure that you meet that objective. So you will document 3 to 5 objectives and the associated metrics, and how do you make sure that you meet those objectives as part of your ISMS. You want to document about resources of the IMS, how you evaluate competency, the user awareness and training that you have for AI, responsible use of AI, and your policy, your AI governance policy, how you communicate issues related to the IMS to stakeholders internally, how you manage documentation of your AIMS. These are all mandatory requirement clauses, how you manage the control of that documentation. So these policies, these standards, how do you maintain them? How often do you review them? If you review annually for version control. You're also going to document like your day-to-day, like, okay, for operational planning and control, we get together and quarterly basis on the AIMS. We perform an annual risk assessment. We evaluate risk treatment every time there's a risk assessment. We do quarterly reviews of risk and reevaluation of risk treatment or dates of risk mitigation. You document that you've done impact, what you will do for impact assessment at a high level, that's part of your operational planning and control process. And then on section 9 here, you have to have an area on monitoring, measuring, analysis, and evaluation. So an internal audit, you will document that you do the internal audit, that you have a program, you reference to all these other documents where you have the specifics, for instance, of your internal audit charter. You will conduct a quarterly or whatever periodic review of your AIMS with management review of a committee getting together and meeting on plan intervals and the kind of things that they review. And then you will continue your loop of continual process improvement through meeting quarterly, reviewing nonconformities and corrective action plans, approving updated documents for policies, approving changes to the IMS, and all of that. It's captured to go through this like life cycle of getting certified and staying certified. You would also want to document at some point your AI governance policy. And in here, if you're doing the UAI Act, you could lump all the specifics that apply to you for the UAI Act. So let's say if you were like a model provider, you will have here your procedures that you will meet specifically for the UAI Act in terms of your transparency obligations and your testing obligations and so on and so forth. So this is a good policy to document all of that. Then you have the statement of applicability, the SOA, where you're going to document for the Annex A controls, the 38 controls, whether this applies or not. If it doesn't apply, I'm sorry, if it doesn't, why is this moving? I apologize. If it doesn't apply, why? You have to document. This is a mandatory requirement, the justification for exclusion. And you want to document if this is a regulatory, contractual, business process, or risk assessment item to meet all the controls related to your program. So this is a mandatory template that you have to do as part of your AMS. As mentioned a few times, you're going to have an AMS steering committee. You want to document the members, the mission, the objectives of this committee, who's involved. And again, we have templates here galore to help you put this together based on your specifics, your company, and how you would go about it. Then you're going to want to document your risk system, your risk management program is what this is. And what is it that you're looking at specifically in terms of your risk management program? So again, there's a lot of templates out there. This is one of them where you will meet all the requirements of the standard. You're going to have to need an internal audit plan. What is it that the auditors are reviewing? When are they going to do the audit? What's in scope? Who's involved in the audit? What is the schedule? So all of that you will want to document and have as part of your AIMS. You want to also have a data governance policy, responsible AI and development policy, acceptable use policy, which you probably have. And then with the impact assessment, you want to make sure that you have AI system registry. You document your use cases of your AI and whatever it is that you're building. And then you're going to want to have your, so for instance, in our template, you will have a lot of different domains that you will want to evaluate your models against for privacy, for fairness, for bias, for security, for explainability. Not everything applies to every company, but it's nice to have a list of all the items that you will assess for impact. And based on the results of this, you will document how, if there's anything that you need to improve to mitigate impact to society, to the environment, to legal or compliance obligations, and document if you had any observations related to impact assessment and your corrective action plan. So in short, we went over here with a lot of the templates that you will need, not every single nook and cranny, but there's a lot of help out there. There's a lot of resources. We could be of help here if you want to DIY this yourself and do ISO 4201 or help big clients and customers get through this with a program and a process. I look forward to your feedback. Anytime you want to talk about ISO 4201, FedRAMP, CMMC, you name it, love to get a hold of you, talk to you. And if you have any questions on what we went over or how to do this better, really appreciate your feedback. Until the next time, have a great, great day.